Terry, you have been in ministry for a long time. I think you're turning 90 next week. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. A long trip.
Many, many years of pastoral ministry and leading organizations. And now you have given birth to an organization called Anágo Partners. And would you just tell us, what was your inspiration, your motivation to start Anágo Partners? We'll talk a little bit more about what it is a little bit later, but what was your motivation to start Anágo Partners?
Well, I've always, from seminary days, been interested in what are the contributing factors for a healthy church. We know it so much in the scriptures that describe what a church is meant to be, but then you take those basic ideas and principles, biblical principles, and then try to flesh them out into actual practices. You can pretty well determine whether a church is healthy or not. And in this case, I spent a good deal of my ministry working on church planning. All the way from planning a church myself in Miami to working with the denomination's mission to North America. And we were concentrating, high concentration on how or what is the best way to start a church from a standpoint of area, from the standpoint of leadership, from the standpoint of organizing pastor, from a number of factors. But after I returned from New York, where I'd been working with Tim Keller at the Redeemer Church, I was called by a group of elders from In-Town Community Church here in Atlanta. Their wonderful growth period came to a kind of a sudden end, and the church went into a really difficult time. Actually, from around 1,100 in attendance to almost 300 in attendance. And they asked me to come and help sort of sort out the issues and problems and challenges, and I was very happy to do that. I had just finished 12 or 13 years at Redeemer in New York. And what happened there was we thought deeply about what are the factors that lead toward a church's growth and health and well-being and expansion, and what are the negative factors that contribute toward a downward spiral. At In-Town, it was complicated and severe. But I drew on a number of factors I'd seen through my career as to what makes for a healthy, growing church. And then, just concentrating right on this particular part, I began to get all kinds of inquiries. What are you doing? My church is in need of renewal dynamics. And I began to get so many different inquiries. Of course, I couldn't do anything about it because I'd obligated my time and energy to In-Town Church. But I was at least interested in knowing how deep is this problem. And I discovered it is not only a really serious issue and problem in our own denomination, but it is a serious problem across the whole evangelical continent of churches. So that's, in a sense, how I began to think about what would it take if we were to form some sort of an approach, not an organization. Organizations are up and down, and good or bad, successful, unsuccessful, but what are the dynamics that lead to a renewal of a local church? And we took what we were doing at In Town, took my experiences across the years of working with churches, some emphasis on leadership development from church planning, and sort of put those together. And we soon discovered there are principles, there are issues, there are questions, there's a whole dynamic of answers as to why a church begins to nosedive. And so it was in that exercise of trying to decide and trying to analyze why churches go into decline that we were able to mark those, define those, come to understand them more deeply, and then put together at least a semblance to begin with, because Anágo Partners wasn't just like that. It was a process that we went through, asking questions, a lot of questions, and getting the interest and advice of pastors who had been in what we call sort of turnaround churches. First thing we discovered is there's never a turnaround church. It doesn't have a turnaround pastor. And that is sort of business speak, but it works well if we understand the dynamics of a church. So we began to experiment. And Anágo Partners just didn't happen like that. It was 2-3 years of deep experimentation. And what we have now, we're thankful to the Lord for, that seems to be used by Him, is an amalgamation and a concentration of ideas we tried. Some worked, some didn't. Some seemed to be more balanced and helpful to almost all kinds of churches, large or small. And that's sort of the broad stroke answer to your question of how we got started in Anágo Partners.
We've one of the major programs of Anágo Partners is the Pastoral Leadership Cohort, and I've heard you say that this program is Seminary Part B.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Why do you feel that this program, which is leadership training for pastors, why do you feel that's so important?
Well, a deep dive study of the present condition of pastors will find that there's a huge discouragement, disappointment among pastors of all sizes of churches and all denominations. Statistics show how deep the issue seems to be. But we were able, and this was truly, I think, of God, we were able to isolate 10 to 15 areas of ministry that pastors struggle with. Some because they've never been trained in these areas. But these areas go from leadership dynamics and development and tools and traits, so on, that also have to do with the psychological makeup of a pastor, the emotional makeup of a pastor, the learning experience, how quickly they grasp a new idea and a new tool of leadership. And we put those into 10 to 12 units of training that I have never seen anywhere else. We've seen training in how to structure a church. What's the strategic nature of a vision statement? We've seen skill in preaching and communication, which is very essential. But we have not seen across the board of evangelical churches, congregations, where a pastor has learned how to build a vision, plan, and statement, how a pastor recruits the right leaders, how a pastor trains the right leaders. And then mixed with that is how well is a pastor doing personally, physically, psychologically, mentally, spiritually. Pastors are, we have found, are not generally the most healthy of leaders. That surprised us. But it is true that some pastors are not as healthy physically, socially, friends, confidants, etc. So we have mixed elements of leadership training, elements of personal development, spiritual, psychological development, into the best mix of what is needed and what we can deliver and help them with, what they themselves can discover on their own that they can do. We're creating an atmosphere for them to look at this task from a pretty complicated and pretty deep point of view. Because being a pastor is a huge challenge. Leadership-wise, psychologically, family-wise, education-wise, problem-solving-wise, this is a much bigger task than what we tell young men who are coming into seminary and coming into leadership training. And so much of what we have discovered has come not from us or reading books, but from the pastors themselves. In a sense, they don't realize it, but they have actually, by the deep interaction that we've had with them, have actually contributed to the courses that we now are offering that are being so helpful to pastors.
Yeah. So you said that being a pastor is a huge challenge. Current statistics are showing that pastors are leaving the ministry in large numbers, and a recent Barna report said that those that are not leaving the ministry would like to but don't have a good opportunity.
Yes.
Why do you think that this is the case? It seems to be in the U.S. that it's there's just a huge discouragement factor among pastors. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, it's multifaceted. I must say that. It's not simplistic. There's no simplistic answer. We say there's no magic bullet. If I just go to a conference and learn this one thing, everything is going to be okay. There's no magic bullet. There's no easy answer. It's complicated. The church as a social institution, spiritual institution, is complicated. It's made up of different kinds of people from different backgrounds and temperaments and so on. So it is a big challenge. And I think one of the issues is that we have never concentrating high skill development leadership training. In most seminaries, we do not get that kind of hands-on training. And that's needed because the church is an organism or an organization. It has people and leaders and systems and plans and developments, and there needs to be somebody leading. So we are trying to ascertain what these factors are and going straight to them. Now, how we go to them is really something special in that we have 10 to 12 cohort meetings in cohorts, 10 to 12 men. meet every month for an entire year, and very deep interactive learning. Some learning from subject matter experts. A lot of interaction, and then each month, each of these pastors get a major section on coaching. We have found that that you cannot see change in a leader's makeup by a single unit event. It happens over a period of time. It happens in interaction and learning from one another. It happens in coaching. It happens in trying and failing, and making it safe to try things that a pastor has never tried before.
Yeah.
So we're pretty enthused and excited about what God is doing in these cohorts. Pastors from very small churches to very enormous, very, very large congregations. In a real sense, there are differences in the leadership dynamics between a small church and a mega church. But in another sense, there are more similarities than there are differences. And we must prepare our pastors in the future with better understanding of the task, how to overcome obstacles, how to recruit leaders, how to train leaders, and see them prosper and flourish. Because if you find leaders that are gifted, maybe in some cases, I found in my own case, I found leaders who knew how to do things far better than I did. Why wouldn't we want to recruit those and empower them to do that? And that's exactly what we did at In-Town Church when we were trying to think about regrouping and redesigning and so on. We found leaders that had never been used before. And designing the plan that they were to use, and training them and encouraging them. Well, it simply makes the leadership of a church much smoother, much more satisfying to see people. I've had in my churches numerous people who were far more gifted than I was. It was hard for me to admit that. But men and women who could handle sections of ministry, develop them, design them, recruit leaders to them, and supervise and grow those ministries without my leadership, because I didn't know how to do everything. And here again, this is a biblical idea that there are gifts in the church that Paul talks about, and all of them are important. One can't say to the other, I don't need you. But that's just a passage in the scripture. We don't see that actually in practice as much as we ought to.
So you've talked about the health of the church and the health of the pastor. So the two primary ministry programs of Anágo Partners, one is flourishing churches and the other is flourishing pastors. It's been said that flourishing churches are always led by flourishing pastors, and Anágo Partners is focused on these flourishing pastors. David Kinnaman, who is the president of Barna Group, made a statement recently that the church is in a crisis of leadership, and he calls upon us, the church, the Lord's church, for compassion for pastors. And it appears, as I hear that from him and what you said here, it seems that this is a ministry of compassion for churches and for pastors, because the church is the Lord's plan A, right?
Right.
And
Oh, absolutely.
and she's not doing well.
Right.
So what I'm impressed with you about, one of the things I'm impressed with about you, Terry, is that you love the church. I asked you years and years ago, it was probably 30 years ago, I asked you, what do you think about when you get up in the morning? You said, I'm thinking about the church. And what do you think about when you go to bed? You said, I'm thinking about the church. I did accuse you of not playing enough, and that's true. But I'm impressed with your heart that you care about the church. And here you are, 90 years old, and still very active with in seeking to develop a ministry that cares for the church.
Well, it sounds sort of trite, but I think we have to turn our attention and our love and concern to where Jesus turned his attention.
Absolutely.
He loved the church and gave himself for the church.
Yes.
And interesting, he didn't start this great worldwide ministry that has eternal consequences without a plan. He took 12 and trained them over a period of time. Some of them did better than others, and we know the story through the scriptures. And then Paul did exactly the same thing. So there is some broad idea that participants and leaders must be trained. But the issue is, if the pastor has not been trained in leadership dynamics, how can he do that? That's where I think seminaries need to turn some of their attention. So this is an enormous challenge, and it is so big. The need is so big. I don't think any of us really understand how big this need is. But we can just keep talking about how big the need is. What, by God's grace and plan, can he help us do about it? And that's where it has to start. And we're only one small unit in the larger scale of the church. One of the things that I did when we first started this, I was coming from in-town church into start Anágo Partners. And by the way, the whole design of what we do by way of deep training over a period of time was not really my idea. It was the idea of our staff that said, let's look at this from different perspectives. Let's not just do the same thing over and over again. Let's be innovative within the bounds of biblical ideas and practices. And so I started reading books about pastors who have been part of, well, we call them turnaround churches. This is a commercial business term where a group of investors go into a company that's not doing well and they find a change agent. I want to be careful how I use this terminology because church is not a business. But we found that in every case where you see a church striving, suffering, declining, where you see a church turned around, you see a turnaround pastor. And some of them come with amazing skills that can be applied. A lot of them don't. A lot of them are late learners and apply themselves to learning some of the skills of leadership that important for any volunteer organization. So it turned my head and turned my mind and turned my heart to how this can be done. I think in the scriptures, using Jesus as the supreme example, which we should, Jesus was a shepherd, but a shepherd leads. And he leads the sheep out to pastures. He determines what pasture. He leads them against dangers. He leads them back into the pen where there is safety. Sometimes we use the image of a shepherd in ways to teach the Bible or to love the sheep. But the shepherd was also a leader. And then where the minds of most of us jump is, oh, well, his personality lends itself to being a leader. You know, if he was in business, he would do very well as a leader. So we just dismiss it with that. But I've seen through the years, and we have seen in Anágo Partners, pastors whose personalities don't lend themselves to a strong natural leader. Their own personalities that God has given, but they learn skills of how in their personality they can lead.
Yeah, yeah.
That's one of the best things that we have discovered, I think, in Anágo Partners. And Anágo Partners may have had some small thing to do with my concern and my hope that we could do something about it. But Anágo Partners is a result of our staff who are committed to the church, committed to learn new ideas, committed to take basic principles that God has used in the past and apply them in certain different circumstances and situations. And that is a key. What works here doesn't work there. What works with his personality doesn't work with this personality. But there are principles that can be applied. And that's why we are so thrilled with what God is doing with these leaders, these pastors. And we should not be the people who are singing our own song, but this is what we're hearing from the pastors themselves. And that is what is so encouraging.
We have taken a number of pastors through these cohorts now, many pastors, and we're hearing story after story from them of how it has benefited them. You've probably heard some of those stories.
Oh, yes. I read them 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's gratifying to hear them give a testimony of the impact in their lives.
Right.
And you talked about a deep dive, and some of them talk about that story. That is part of their story is that we went deep with them. Sometimes going deep was uncomfortable.
Yes, so of course.
And sometimes it revealed things about us that we'd rather not know. But another recent study shows that the number one cause of pastors failing is lack of self-awareness. So we're committed to building that self-awareness.
Right.
And our programs and our coaching are designed around that. Even in our cohort workshops, you strike me as being a very self-aware person. Just your willingness to share that other people in the church are more gifted than you in certain things.
Yes, yeah.
That's huge. I found that when in the area of church planting, it's a lot more popular to say I want to start a church and we're starting a church, than it is to say our church needs renewal.
All right.
I can remember being a pastor, and I hated the thought that my church needed renewal, because for me it was an admission of failure.
Right.
Which is really not, that's a misnomer, right? And so there could be all sorts of factors involved in a church needing renewal. But the thing that I felt that I had to deal with in my own heart and thinking is being able to be really truly aware of my personal state, where I was emotionally, spiritually, and where the church is, and being able to say, I need help.
Oh, boy.
That's a tough thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is, but it is a kind of gospel humility that is so attractive. I need help is much more usable by the Lord than, sure, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
No sweat, no problem. That's, I think, called humility. And it's a wonderful feeling. At least it is in my ministry. In every aspect of my ministry, whether it was church planning, leadership, or creating some other structure that would help the whole movement of church planning and church growth, the most satisfying thing in my ministry over these years is seeing other leaders flourish who were better than I was. And I've had some encouraging, exhilarating experiences with that. And well, there are things we can do. There are ministries that we can advance. There are skills that we can train in that will will be helpful for a pastor in the church.
Yeah.
This is what these pastors are telling us.
Yes.
And so there is hope.
Yeah.
You know, if we ever get to a point as a church, a denomination, or a group of churches that the church is just going to die and nothing we can do about it, you know, just pray a lot and hope for the best. That's not really a gospel approach.
No.
And so what can be done? I am sure there are other approaches beside Anágo Partners that God is using. God forbid that we should ever say this is the only thing.
Right.
But this is one small thing that we are seeing God bless and churches turned around.
Yeah. Well, how much longer do you think you can do this? You're still in the ministry at 90.
Not many more years. Yeah, and I am in the background. And leaders like yourself, I praise God for, that are doing. I want to say, Rod, that what I think about a pastor finding key people to carry on ministry and recruiting them and training them well is a little piece of what I see in Anágo Partners with your leadership and the leadership of our other pastors, trainers, and administrators, and they're doing a terrific work. And I have the great joy of standing back and seeing them develop, grow, produce, And that's the joy I have at my stage in life.
What a wonderful legacy. And I sometimes think about my longevity in ministry, and I think, well, goodness gracious, Terry's 20 years ahead of me, and it's hard for me to imagine myself doing it until 90. But you surely are an inspiration to a lot of people.
I don't take credit for my genes.
Yeah.
And I am coming more and more to a time when I must step back, and I don't want to ever occupy a space that some younger leader can occupy and do a much better job that I could do.
Well, on behalf of a lot of people, I want to say thank you for your leadership.
You're welcome.
You're one of the best, finest leaders that I know, and a lot of people are very thankful for that.
Thank you.